Hi guys, Hayden Simmons here, and in today's video I'm going to show you how I created this drawing using the reference photo on the left. I start with a circle which represents the cranium, and I usually do this with all of my portraits that I work on. As you can tell, if you're familiar with this YouTube channel, I always start portraits exactly the same way. I draw a horizontal and vertical line through the circle and then start mapping out the facial features like the nose, the mouth, and also the eyebrows and also the eyes. You can see here that I'm sketching pretty lightly on the page. I'm using straight lines throughout, and I'm just trying to get the proportions and the accuracy correct before moving on to the details. You can see I'm mapping out things like the eyes, and then I also turn my drawing upside down so I can notice any mistakes that I wouldn't be able to see if I just drew it the right way up all the time. And like the cranium and also the big circle that I usually draw, this is also something that I do for every portrait that I work on. I always turn it upside down a few times so I can see any mistakes, and it helps me see the portrait in more abstract terms. So I start working on the finer details of the facial features, things like the eyes, the wrinkles to the eyes, the eyelids, and also the structure of the nose. I continually draw straight lines, thinking about the big shapes of the portrait. I'm not worried about the details at this stage. I'll even go in and erase any errors that I see on the page just to make sure it's completely concrete before going on to the rendering and the details stage. So if you see any mistakes or you think anything is wrong with your portrait, do go in and erase. I always constantly check the alignment of the facial features against each other. So how does it line up horizontally and vertically? If you're not noticing any mistakes within your piece, definitely try this technique out by turning your image and also the photograph upside down. I keep going back and forth into the portrait, rubbing out any mistakes that I see, working on the eyes before turning it around again, and working at the correct view. I then begin to press a bit harder on my page as I'm now creating more of a concrete base for my image, working on things like the hair and this overall placement. I'm checking to see if this mouth is in the correct place. I'm not afraid to use the eraser and just rub out any mistakes, even though it's more hard work and more work going forwards. But it's better to erase any mistakes at this stage before you start rendering, getting into the details, and then realize, there's a mistake. So I definitely recommend doing it at this stage. You can see I'm going more into the details of the ears, the nose, and also the background as well as the jawline and the outline of the face. Keeping it pretty loose still at this stage. I'm still concentrating on those big shapes. And when I say the big shapes, if you look at the shadow underneath the nose and also the shadows underneath the eyes and above the eyes, this is what I'm referring to. Always look at the big shapes. Again, I turn the image upside down as I'm still not happy with the alignment of everything. I just want to make sure this portrait is 100% accurate. So don't be afraid to turn your portrait or your drawing upside down a few times, and even take a break, 5 to 10 minutes, grab yourself a coffee, and then come back to it. I then go into the rendering part of this portrait process. Firstly, working on the ear for this portrait. I do this as I'll be rendering from left to right, and I don't want my hand to smudge any of the areas that I'm actually rendering. So I'm starting from left to right, starting with that ear. I then go on to the background, adding a dark shade behind this portrait before moving on to the big shape shadow of that neck. Then working on the details such as the hair and also parts of that ear. I'm just going back and forth in between that hair, the ear, to that neck, concentrating on those mid-tones. I always recommend you draw using 3 or 4 tones. So you've got 1 dark, 1 light, and 2 mid-tones. When I say a mid-tone, if you have a look at the left and the right hand side of that forehead, that's considered a mid-tone within this portrait. I then go on to the finer details and the darkness of these eyes. You can see there's quite a lot of shadow within those eye sockets. So I want to capture this within the portrait, looking at those finer details. I know I keep banging on about the big shapes, but I'm doing this within the rendering part as well. You can see it's pretty much all straight lines still at this stage. Before moving on to the nose, so looking at the wrinkles to the side of that nose and the main shadow underneath that nose as well. The darkest areas of that nose comes from the nostrils and then works further down, so you can see the darkest areas are within those nostrils. I then try and capture the 3D essence of that nose, so you can see there is some reflected light underneath that nose. Reflected light into some dark areas. It's quite a bulbous sort of nose, so I really want to capture the 3D essence and the circular motion to that nose. It really just helps bring that portrait and also that nose out even further. Always think your drawing as a 3D object. It's not a 2D drawing on a 2D surface. Try and think of it as a sculpture that you're trying to mold. Always think in 3D, looking at those shadows on the left hand side of that eye there before working on the eyebrows. I really want to capture the finer details, so the wrinkles and also the left hand side and the right hand side of those eyebrows. I then really try and capture the outline of the face, and you can see there's a slight shadow going from the right hand side of the outline of that face, and it continues right the way down to the chin and goes all the way up again. So I just wanted to capture that within the portrait. I add a darker background to the right hand side of the portrait, concentrating on using only a few tones for the drawing. Before working on the mouth, you can see it's really starting to take shape now, and most of those facial features are now in place. I'm pretty happy with how it's going so far, and you can see, especially from this portrait, the darkest areas comes from the inside of that mouth. You can also see there's some reflected light on that upper lip, and there's a highlight on that bottom lip as well. Before working on the details of that neck, you can see there's quite a lot going on with that neck. There's a lot of reflected light. The darkest areas comes from the chin itself, and there's a few wrinkles to describe as well. There's quite a lot going on there, but you can see it's mainly covered with one solid block of shadow. I then transition from a soft pencil, so I was currently using a 4B pencil onto a hard pencil. So for this stage I'm using a 4H, and I use this harder pencil to describe the halftones of the portrait. So for example, that forehead. Constantly looking at the photograph and my drawing, making sure everything is correct, and just keep referring back to that photograph and to make sure your drawing is as accurate as possible. As you can see, I've turned my image upside down again, just so I can see all those mistakes and all those areas which I haven't covered within the portrait again. Don't be afraid to do this technique as many times as you want or you think is required before flipping it over again and then working on those finer details. I'm just going back and forth from looking at the image to my drawing. I'm trying to pull out or make the darks darker to really bring out those light areas. Of course, within your drawing, and like I've said in my other portrait drawing tutorials, you can make your drawing as different as you want from the reference photograph. Of course, you can simply copy that portrait on the left, but if you wanted to, say, add some bigger eyebrows, you didn't want to use so many wrinkles, you wanted to make the nose a bit longer or not as bulbous, or you wanted to change the facial expression, you can do that. Don't be afraid to try new things. For this portrait drawing tutorial, I'm actually just simply copying this photograph on the left, but you can do whatever you fancy. As I've said before, I'm just making sure the darks are the darkest they can be, adding some more darkness to the background for working on, say, the cheeks and also the lower part of that face. I'm using a soft pencil for this stage, which is ideal for making those dark areas within a drawing, working on the whole drawing and not just working on one element at a time. Your process might be completely different, but this is just how I work. We're now coming up to the final stages of this portrait. I'd love to hear how you got on with your own portrait drawing. Do comment me below with how you got on, or if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you and see how you got on with your own portrait. But if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Portrait Guru for even more content in the future, and also, of course, like I was saying previously, comment me below with any thoughts of your own or questions. And then we're pretty much there for this portrait drawing. And then here is the final portrait drawing coming right up. Hope you guys enjoyed. I really do recommend you watching this video coming up. Thanks very much, guys, and see you on the next video.